My phone lit up at exactly 11:46 p.m. I was standing in my kitchen, folding towels fresh from the dryer, exhausted in the quiet way people become when survival turns into routine. The dishes were done. Bills were scheduled. Tomorrow's grocery order was already placed. Then my mother's text appeared. Just married my coworker in Vegas. You're pathetic, by the way. That was it. No hello, no explanation. Just another insult wrapped in casual cruelty. I stared at the screen for a long moment, strangely calm. No tears, no shaking hands. Just silence. Somewhere deep inside me, something finally stopped trying. Because this wasn't new. My mother had spent years reminding me I was a burden. My father had perfected the art of making me feel expensive just for existing. And somehow, despite all of it, I was still the one keeping their lives together. I paid their rent when money disappeared, covered their phone plans, handled medical bills, grocery deliveries, utilities, streaming services, insurance payments. Every forgotten emergency somehow landed on my shoulders. But none of it mattered. To them, I wasn't a daughter, I was infrastructure. And that night, sitting in a luxury hotel room with a man she barely knew, my mother still found time to remind me how little she respected me. So I replied with one word: cool. Then I opened my laptop and quietly began taking my life back. I logged into every account connected to my name: credit cards, frozen, utilities, removed from autopay, phone plans, disconnected, streaming subscriptions, canceled, smart home access, revoked, shared grocery cards, closed. Every invisible thread tying me to their chaos, I cut one by one, not angrily, carefully, like someone finally removing splinters after years of pretending they didn't hurt. By midnight, their entire safety net was gone, and for the first time in years, I slept peacefully. The next morning, there was pounding at my front door. 3 hard knocks. I opened it expecting a delivery driver. Instead, 2 police officers stood there. Miss Layla Gray? Yes. We received a report regarding identity theft and unlawful lock changes. Of course. The moment control disappeared, my mother turned herself into the victim. I stepped aside calmly and invited them in. Then I walked to the hallway cabinet where I kept every financial document I'd spent years organizing. Mortgage records, utility statements, bank transfers, signed account agreements, everything, all under my name. The officers sat quietly flipping through the paperwork while realization slowly crossed their faces. One finally looked up. You've been paying for all of this? I nodded. For years. The taller officer exhaled softly. She claimed you illegally took over her property. I pointed toward the framed deed hanging on the wall. My name is on the house. Silence. Then the officer closed the folder gently. No charges here, he said. Looks like you simply revoked access to your own accounts. Before leaving, he paused near the door. You could file charges for false reporting if you wanted. I smiled faintly. No, I said. I already closed the door. The rest is just noise. When they left, I sat alone in the quiet living room and stared at the sunlight coming through the windows. I wasn't angry anymore, just awake. You don't realize how exhausted you are until nobody's draining you anymore. Growing up, love in our house was transactional. My father used to say things like, "You're lucky we sacrificed for you." Meanwhile, I was sacrificing for everyone. At 14, I got my first part-time job. At 18, I started helping with bills. By 22, I was financially supporting 2 grown adults who still treated me like an inconvenience. Every achievement I earned was minimized. Every boundary I tried to set became selfishness. And every time I hoped they'd finally appreciate me, they found a new way to remind me I wasn't enough. Still, I stayed. Because children raised on guilt become adults addicted to proving their worth. I thought if I gave enough, loved enough, worked enough, eventually they would soften. Instead, they got comfortable. comfortable draining me, comfortable insulting me, comfortable believing I would never leave. That was their mistake. A few days after the police visit, my mother posted online a blurry selfie, crying face, hotel background, caption: "Imagine raising a daughter who locks you out of your own life." The sympathy poured in immediately. Relatives commented things like, "So heartbreaking. You deserve better. How could she do this?" But then something unexpected happened. Someone told the truth. An old college friend commented beneath the post, "Are we talking about the same daughter who paid your rent, utilities, and groceries for years while you mocked her?" The comments exploded. Former neighbors spoke up. Old coworkers spoke up. Even people I barely knew started sharing stories about seeing me exhausted, overworked, constantly carrying responsibilities that weren't mine. Then someone leaked the Vegas text. Suddenly, the narrative shifted. Now people were asking different questions. You insulted the person funding your life? You called her pathetic after everything she did? You pushed away the only person holding your world together. Within hours, my mother deleted the post. My sister vanished from social media entirely, and my father, silent, like always. But by then, something bigger had already changed. For the first time in my life, people saw me clearly, not as difficult, not as dramatic, not as selfish, just tired. And honestly, that recognition healed something inside me. A week later, I was invited onto a podcast about family burnout and emotional boundaries. At first, I almost said no. I'd spent years shrinking myself to survive. But then I thought about all the people silently living the same story, so I said yes. I didn't expose names. I didn't scream. I simply told the truth. What it feels like to become your family's unpaid emotional support system. What it feels like to finance people who resent needing you. What it feels like to disappear inside responsibility. The episode went viral overnight. Thousands of messages flooded my inbox. Women, men, parents, adult children. People from every background saying the same thing. I thought I was the only one. That sentence broke my heart every time I read it. Because toxic family systems survive through silence, and silence was finally losing. So I built something from that pain. I started a blog called The Reset Button, not for revenge, for recovery. I wrote about boundaries, financial independence, emotional exhaustion, the difference between love and obligation. And slowly, strangers became a community. People celebrated tiny victories together, canceling shared accounts, saying no without apologizing, sleeping peacefully for the first time in years, learning they didn't have to earn rest. Meanwhile, my own life started changing. I redecorated my house, painted the walls warm gold, bought furniture I actually liked instead of things chosen for other people's comfort, started yoga classes, cooked meals for myself instead of entire households. For the first time, my life belonged to me. Then came the message. My cousin Renee wrote, "He left her. She has nowhere to go." I stared at the screen quietly. No apology, no accountability, just expectation. As if my role in the family had always been permanent rescue. But something inside me had finally learned an important truth. Love without boundaries becomes self-destruction. So I didn't answer. Instead, I published a new article titled, "No is a complete sentence," and people shared it thousands of times. Months passed. My mother's Vegas marriage collapsed spectacularly. Turns out the man she married had a history of fraud, unpaid debts, and disappearing acts. The irony would have been funny if it weren't so sad. The woman who spent years mocking my caution had gambled her future on a stranger and lost. One afternoon, nearly a year later, I was watering lavender outside my front porch when I heard the gate creak open. I already knew who it was before I looked up. My mother stood there looking smaller somehow, older, tired. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then finally she whispered, "I'm sorry." Not defensive, not manipulative, just broken. Tears gathered behind her sunglasses. "I was cruel to you," she said quietly. You didn't deserve it. I listened without interrupting, and then came the part I already expected. I just need somewhere to stay for a little while. There it was, the ask. I looked at her carefully, not as a frightened daughter anymore, but as a woman protecting the peace she fought hard to build. I forgive you, I said softly. Hope flickered across her face. Then I continued. But forgiveness doesn't mean access. The hope disappeared. I handed her a folded paper with the address of a women's resource center and a counselor's name. They'll help you, I said, but this house stays closed. She nodded slowly. For once, there was no argument left. As she walked away, I realized something unexpected. I didn't feel guilt. I felt free. Later that evening, my son stepped onto the porch beside me holding 2 mugs of tea. You okay? He asked gently. I looked around at the peaceful home I built from the ashes of survival, and for the first time in my life, the answer came easily. Yeah, I said, I really am. Because they called me pathetic. They called me selfish. They treated me like a burden while standing on top of everything I carried for them. But when I finally stopped giving, the truth became impossible to ignore. I was never the problem. I was the foundation. And the moment I walked away, everything they built on my silence collapsed without me.